A chip built in China just made the most powerful quantum computer in the world look like a basic calculator. And the engineers who built those machines aren't brushing it off. They're genuinely unsettled. And this isn't tabloid sensationalism, and it isn't geopolitical spin dressed up as science reporting. What happened in early 2025 was something the global scientific community had long feared and long predicted. China didn't simply close the gap in the quantum computing race. It stepped to the front of the line, turned around, and looked back at everyone else. The machine it used to do that is called Zhuangzi 3.0. To understand why that name deserves your attention, even if you've never spent a single moment thinking about quantum computing, you need to understand what quantum computing actually is, why it carries such enormous stakes, and why two of the world's most powerful countries are pouring billions of dollars into fighting over it. This isn't just a science story, it's a story about global power, about who controls the future of encryption. Military capability, medicine, finance, and the basic infrastructure of modern communication. If you're not paying attention, you're already behind. Start with the basics. Every computer you have ever used, your phone, your laptop, any machine in any office, runs on the same underlying logic. Information is processed as ones and zeros. A bit is either on or it's off. A transistor either lets electricity flow or it blocks it. Every app, every video, every bank transfer, every encrypted message is ultimately just an enormous sequence of ones and zeros being rearranged at incredible speed. Classical computers are extraordinarily good at this. They've grown faster and smaller every decade since they were invented, but they have a hard ceiling. There are problems genuinely important, world-altering problems, that even the most powerful supercomputer alive today would take longer than the age of the universe to solve. That's not rhetorical exaggeration. It's a mathematical fact. Quantum computers operate on an entirely different set of principles. Instead of bits, they use qubits. And a qubit doesn't have to be a 1 or a 0. It can be both simultaneously in a condition called superposition. 2 qubits in superposition can represent 4 states at once, and 3 can represent 8, and 10 can represent over 1,000. As you keep adding qubits, that number doesn't grow in a straight line, it explodes exponentially. A quantum computer with 100 qubits can theoretically represent more simultaneous states than there are atoms in the observable universe. That is the raw power sitting underneath all of this. And it's why every government, military, and major technology company on Earth is racing to build one. When Google unveiled its Willow chip in late 2024, the world paid attention, and with good reason. Google claimed Willow could complete a specific benchmark computation, a mathematical stress test, in under 5 minutes. The same task, they said, would take one of today's fastest supercomputers 10 septillion years. That's a 10 followed by 25 zeros, a number so vast it doesn't just exceed human comprehension, it dwarfs the age of the universe, which is only around 14 billion years old. The scientific community was impressed, and the press ran with it, and in many respects, the reaction was justified. And then, roughly 3 months later, something happened that most Western outlets barely mentioned. In March 2025, a research team at the University of Science and Technology of China, led by physicist Pan Jianwei, alongside colleagues Zhu Xiaobo and Peng Chengji, published a paper in Physical Review Letters, one of the most respected scientific journals in the world. The paper was quiet and technical, as these papers always are. The results were anything but. Their chip, Zhuangzi 3.0, carried 105 qubits arranged in a precise 15 by 7 lattice. When they ran their benchmarks, the numbers were staggering. The chip completed a quantum computational task in seconds, one that they estimated would take Frontier, the most powerful classical supercomputer on the planet. Housed at Oak Ridge National Laboratory in the United States, approximately 6.4 billion years to finish, not millions, billions. What made the scientific community sit up wasn't just that raw figure, it was the direct comparison with Google's earlier Sycamore processors, the chips that had generated global headlines back in 2019. The performance gap between Zhuchangji 3.0 and those machines wasn't modest. It was 6 orders of magnitude, 1 million times more capable on this particular benchmark. Before going further, there's a crucial distinction that most coverage gets wrong. When researchers say one quantum processor outperforms another, they're referring to a very specific test. Random circuit sampling is a benchmark for measuring quantum advantage, the threshold at which a quantum computer genuinely does something a classical computer cannot realistically accomplish. These benchmarks are valuable for tracking progress. They do not mean that China can now intercept your emails, dismantle encryption systems, or launch a quantum-powered cyber attack. That is not what this chip does. Not yet. What it does is demonstrate capability, and at this level, capability is everything. The history of transformative technology is full of moments where the capability existed long before the most consequential application became possible. The first nuclear reactor was not a bomb, but without it, there would have been no bomb. Zhuchangji 3.0 is not a weapon. It is not a decryption machine, but it represents a proof of concept at a scale and fidelity that shifts what experts believe is achievable and how soon. The engineering behind the chip is genuinely remarkable. Its qubits are built from superconducting materials, specifically engineered combinations of tantalum, aluminum, and niobium, chosen because at temperatures near absolute zero, they conduct electricity with zero resistance. This matters because one of a qubit's greatest enemies is decoherence, the tendency of a quantum state to collapse the moment it encounters any outside interference. A stray vibration, a faint electromagnetic signal, a single photon of light, any of these can destroy a qubit's quantum properties in an instant. Quantum machines must therefore operate in environments colder than deep space, shielded from virtually every imaginable form of noise. And what the Chinese team achieved with Zhuchangji 3.0 was qubit fidelity that directly rivals and in some measure surpasses what Google accomplished with Willow. Single qubit gate fidelity reached 99.90%. 2-qubit gate fidelity hit 99.62%. Readout fidelity came in at 99.13%. These figures represent a level of precision that 5 years ago many physicists believed would take a decade to reach. The chip also incorporates 182 couplers, the microscopic bridges that allow qubits to interact, without which the entangled operations that give quantum computers their power wouldn't be possible. And here is where the story shifts from scientific to geopolitical. This chip was not built by a private company chasing quarterly earnings. It was built inside a national laboratory in Hefei, a city in Anhui province that most Westerners couldn't locate on a map, backed by a government that has formally identified quantum technology as a strategic national priority and funded it with a focus and scale that has no parallel in the Western world. China has invested an estimated $16 billion in quantum computing research. That is roughly 4 times what the United States federal government has committed over the same period. Quantum technology appears explicitly in China's 5-year national plans as one of 7 frontier fields deemed critical to national power. The stated goal written into official policy documents is not to be competitive, it is to lead. What happened in March 2025 suggests they are not merely chasing that goal, they are executing on it. This sends a specific and uncomfortable message to Washington. For the past 3 decades, a core assumption of American strategic thinking has been that while China could manufacture at scale and at low cost, the cutting edge of fundamental scientific research would remain in Western institutions, and that assumption has been eroding quietly for years. Zhuchangji 3.0 didn't erode it. It punched through it. The U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, which advises Congress, released a report stating plainly that China is aggressively pursuing cryptographically relevant quantum computing and may be deliberately obscuring how far its most sensitive programs have advanced. The U.S. government's own advisory body believes China may have quantum research more advanced than anything the public has seen. And it isn't only computing power China has been developing in parallel. While the United States is concentrated largely on raw quantum hardware, building faster machines and working to correct their errors, China has been pursuing a second strategy that may be more immediately dangerous. They have been constructing a quantum communication network, and they have largely already won that race. China's quantum communication backbone now stretches over 10,000 kilometers. It connects 145 backbone nodes, 20 metropolitan subnetworks, and 6 ground stations linked to quantum satellites. Satellites launched specifically to distribute encryption keys from orbit. The network is operational. It spans 17 provinces and 80 cities and is already in active use by Chinese financial institutions, government agencies, and military communications. Nothing in the United States, Europe, or anywhere else in the West comes close to matching it in scale or operational maturity. The reason quantum secured communication matters so profoundly comes down to physics. When two parties exchange a quantum encryption key, any attempt by a third party to intercept it inevitably disturbs the quantum state of the particles being transmitted. That disturbance is detectable, and it is physically impossible to eavesdrop on a quantum key without leaving evidence. This isn't a feature of clever design, it is a fundamental law of nature. China has a working, national-scale version of this, the West does not. And the long-term threat that quantum computing poses to global security has a name: Q-Day. This is the hypothetical point at which a quantum computer becomes powerful and stable enough to run Shor's algorithm at scale. Developed by mathematician Peter Shor in 1994, the algorithm can factor enormous numbers exponentially faster than any classical machine. And factoring enormous numbers is the mathematical foundation of nearly every encryption system currently protecting the world's digital infrastructure, banking apps, private communications, classified government data, nuclear command systems. A sufficiently powerful quantum computer running Shor. Its algorithm would render all of that encryption transparent. Zhuangzi 3.0 cannot do this, and neither can Google's Willow. Breaking real-world encryption would likely require millions of error. 4 corrected logical qubits. Q-Day is not tomorrow. Most credible estimates place it somewhere between 5 and 15 years away. But Q-Day doesn't need to arrive for the threat to be active right now. Intelligence agencies are already engaged in what defense circles call harvest now, decrypt later, and encrypted data is intercepted today and stored in archives. When a quantum computer eventually becomes capable of breaking the encryption, those archives are unlocked. Conversations, negotiations, military communications, financial transfers, all of it retroactively exposed. The quantum threat is therefore not a future problem. Every piece of sensitive data transmitted today using classical encryption is potentially already sitting in a server farm somewhere waiting. Every breakthrough like Zhuangzi 3.0 brings the waiting period closer to its end. China's advantage in quantum technology doesn't exist in isolation either. It forms part of a broader, coordinated strategy that extends into materials and supply chains. In April 2025, just weeks after Zhuangzi 3.0 made headlines, China imposed export licensing restrictions on gadolinium, terbium, dysprosium, lutetium, and several other heavy rare earth elements, critical inputs for quantum hardware, semiconductor manufacturing, and advanced defense systems. China controls the majority of the global supply of these materials. When it restricted bismuth exports earlier in 2025, the spot price rose from roughly $12 per kilogram to over $108 per kilogram within weeks. Antimony prices climbed 250% following similar measures. Build the best chips, own the network, control the raw materials. It is a strategy executed across multiple dimensions at once. The United States is not without genuine strengths. Google's error correction advances are real. The American commercial quantum ecosystem is broader and more diverse than China's, with over 40 serious players across companies, national laboratories, and universities. IBM continues building toward ambitious targets. The U.S. private sector, when it moves with urgency, can move in ways that centrally planned systems cannot easily match. But the structural gaps are real too. A $4 billion federal investment against China's $16 billion. A decentralized innovation model that produces creativity, but also fragmentation. Export controls intended to slow China's progress have, in part, accelerated its drive toward technological self-sufficiency. The two quantum ecosystems are diverging into separate worlds, and a bifurcated world is a more volatile one. Something shifted in March 2025. A chip in China didn't just beat a benchmark. It delivered a message heard clearly in every quantum laboratory from California to Munich to Tokyo. The message was straightforward. We are here, we are serious, and we are not stopping. The chips will keep coming, the qubits will keep multiplying, and the distance between what is theoretically possible and what is physically real will keep shrinking, and it will shrink fast. The decisions made in the next 5 years about how to fund, govern, secure, and shape this technology will matter more than any single result.